I have a decision to make. And I don't know how to make it. So I'm kind of hoping that some of you folks in the Discord and in the comment section can let me know what you think. Thanks to my kill boss, Patron Panda. Wyburn makes good art. Check out his Instagram link below. Buy some dice. So here's my big wild list. Okay. My general is a swap collar shaman with Hobgrot, who has Shaman of the Chilled Lands and took the spell Choking Mist. Gobsprak, War Chanter with Fix and Beat. Orc Weird Dob Shaman with the Hand of Cork. Wargug Prophet with Glowing Tattoos and Hoarfrost. Auric Megaboss with Destroyer. 2x10 Ardboys. Reinforced unit of Brutes. 1 unit of Gore Gruntas. And 1 unit of a Gouger. So I think I have a Wizard Finder. I have a Warlord. I have Endorian Acolytes, and I have an Iron Jaw's Fist. I have a million battalions. But, so this list is 150 points short. And the decision that I have to make is what to fill this last 150 points with. There's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different options that I could take. And, like, this extra 20 points is nuts. Like, it's nuts. It's such a weird, like, having 150 points is such a weird spot, because if it was 160 points, I would be like, cool, here's another Gouger. If it was 170 points, right, cool, here's more Gruntas. But all my hero slots are filled, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, all my hero slots are filled. All my battle line slots are filled. So what I'm really missing, so here's sort of how the list plays out. You have 2 Ardboys, which are your anvils in the front. You have Gore Gruntas, and you have Brutes, which are your hammers, which sort of hide in the castle until they're needed. And because Big Wa is a toolbox army, they sort of fill a couple different roles, right? Like the Brutes are going to be really good at taking out any hordes that are standing on objectives because they zone out feet. They're also good at taking down monsters, right? Because they have really good reach and that +1 to hit against monsters built in for early. And then the Gore Grunches are more like your mobile piece, like they're like buff, teleport, 12 inches, Mighty Destroyer, charge, right? Like that kind of thing. And so that's how that works. And then obviously you have all your casters in the center, and the Mega Boss and the are hanging out in the middle, giving out Mighty Bellows, or whatever it's called, right? The multiple commands. And then on one flank you have the Gore Grunt to Gouger, and then on the left flank I had Snarlfang Riders. So that's the unit that we are replacing. I had 130 points left over in this list, and so I ended up deciding to go with Snarlfang Riders. But now I have 150 points, and so I'm open to a few different options here. So let's look at what my options actually are. So the first one, as I said before, is the Snarlfang Riders. Sorry, I'm just pulling up the War Scroll here. So the thing with the Snarlfang Riders that I really liked having them on the flank is because they're fast, right? Snarlfang Riders have a movement speed of 12 inches. They are not particularly fighty, but they're also not like unfighty, like the Slathering Jaw ability attack that they have. You know, you're going to get 10 dice with 3s and 3s and 2 damage. So it also makes them a fairly good Hoarfrost target, right? It's like, okay, 10 attacks going from 0 rend to 2 rend or to 3 rend with 2 damage is actually decent. It's actually decent. But they tend not to be close, right? They tend to like run off on the side, so the rend isn't really a thing, or the Hoarfrost isn't really a thing that goes off on them very often, unless it's just going to be turn 1. That Slathering Jaw is also gets also that smell weakness, right? So it becomes 2s to hit, 3s to wound, and then if you get Hoarfrost. So, you know, they're fast. It's 10 wounds. They can take up a pretty good chunk of space, right? 60 millimeters times 5 plus 4 inches is a pretty good like area that they can cover. And the rest of it's like whatever. The fact that they can pile in and be chosen to fight if they're outside of 6 is kind of cool. It's pretty good at slaying foot heroes, right? They deal kind of, without Hoarfrost, they deal just enough damage to do that. The disadvantages are that, well, it's only 5 models. And right, so they're not super good at taking objectives. and they... What was the other really big thing? And they're not orcs. So they're not going to benefit from any of the WA point buildup, and they are also not going to generate any WA points from charging and being stuck in combat. Cool. So here are some other options that I was thinking of. Another option, which is taking it in a totally different direction, is taking one unit of Hobgrot Slittas and taking Dankhold's... No, not Dankhold's. What are they called? The little stab lads, Dagox stab lads. So if I'm thinking about like 150 points, Dagox stab lads and Hobgrots are 14 feet for objectives, and they also screen super well. Because the Hobgrots are on 25 millimeter bases, you can line them up in a straight line. And then they, they just sort of take up a lot of space. So they would be good to have on a flank, right? To run out and potentially grab an objective, or be teleported onto an objective, or just act as a screen just to get in the way. And then Dagox stab lads can kind of do the same. I like their thinking tokens, their ability so that they don't have to use commands. The one thing that I'm finding about them is that it's not like they just get to auto run 6 every turn or whatever, because sometimes you want to use that command on something else. It's not like it's a free command and it doesn't count as being issued or received and all that, right? Like you still have to actually pay the cost. And a lot of times when you want to issue commands like auto run 6, you want to issue it from the mega boss in Big Wa. So it's like, well, it's like, do I really want to run over there, or do I want to run over here? And if they're not running, then I don't really know what they're using that command point for. It's unlikely that you'll want to use all-out attack or all-out defense on them, so it's not as good as it seems. And then their other ability, where they give -1 to hit or whatever it is on a 4-up, it doesn't it's not consistent enough. So they are very, very good for 70 points. They also, from what I remember, I'm just going to pull up their war scroll here. Dagox stab lads, and where's the other one? Hobgrot Slittas. So they have 3 wounds, so they are 12 wounds. So if I were to go with Hobgrots and Dagox stab lads together, it's like they are 24 wounds, or 22 wounds, right? 10 from the Hobgrots and 12 from Dagox. So that's quite a bit of wounds. It's also the most feet, where I can put that many feet onto objectives. But again, problem with Hobgrot Slittas is that they are not orcs, which means they don't benefit from any of the Big Wa abilities, and they also don't benefit from the, they're not going to generate Big Wa points either. So, but they are the best screens. They are the best screens. So it's like, okay, our Snarlfang's riders are there's only 5 models, and there's only 10 wounds compared to 22 wounds. So we're more than doubling the wound count, and we're going from 5 models to 14 models. So we're almost tripling the model count, but what we're giving up is speed. That's what we're really giving up. So the question is, do you want to have one flank where you have a Mogrunta Gouger who's fast? Well, he's not even that fast. He's only 9 inches, right? He's not slow, but the difference between 9 inches and 12 inches is significant, right? Don't get me wrong. Gouger is great to have on the flank. The run and charge potential adds to his mobility if you can get some of those momentum points build up. But yep, Dagox and Hobgrots they could also be used as more of a frontline screen. So they go in front of the Boarboys and they move out forward and they act as a speed bump. That's a great way you can teleport them up as well, right? Teleport the Hobgrots, put them in a straight line 9 inches away from your opponent, and just be like, well, you have to go through this first. I'm gonna reduce the amount of movement that you can do and whatever down a little bit. So yep, so that's the other option. And the third option that I'm really considering, 150 points, right? The third option that I'm really considering, and that I'm kind of leaning towards, is, oh, that's the wrong page. That's why I couldn't find it. Is Savage Boarboy Maniacs. For 2 reasons. So Savage Boarboy Maniacs are just as fast as our Snarlfang riders, right? They're just as fast. There's 5 models, so they are the same. but they are 15 wounds for 5 models instead of 10 wounds for 5 models. They have a worse save, right? They have a worse save. They have better bravery, but they actually can deal a lot more damage. So, like, if they're just on their own, like I did the math here last night, but if you just have no buffs on them whatsoever, then the Boarboy Maniacs actually do a surprisingly low amount of damage. If they get charged and they have no buffs, the whole unit is dealing like under 5 damage to a 4-up save. Really not that efficient. However, the thing with Savage Boarboy Maniacs is that if they charge, they get +1 attacks, right? They get this Maniac Fury. So it's add 1 of the damage characteristic of this unit's, no, the attack characteristic of this unit's choppas if it made a charge move in the same turn. And if they charge, you add 1 to hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made with tusks and hooves. So all of a sudden it's like, well, we're on, instead of having 15 attacks, we have 20 attacks at 4s and 3s, 0 rend 1 damage. And tusks and hooves go from, it's now 15 attacks at, so it's 35 dice total on 3s and 3s, 0 rend 1 damage. So it's like, well, what happens if you Hoarfrost the choppas? What happens if you give the choppas any kind of rend? If you give the choppas any kind of rend, suddenly, with all-out attack, or even with the wild buffs up, it's like, oh, 3s and 2s. You know, 3s and 2s, 2 rend, 1 damage. Like, all of a sudden, they can pump out about 10 if you get them with 2 rend and they charge. So it's like, okay, like 10 damage is actually a pretty, it's like one of those magic numbers. You know, it's like that's a 5-man unit with 2 wounds each, right? Like, okay, like it's taken out a unit of Hobgrots. It's kind of taken out a screen. And then I thought about this a little bit more, and it's like, well, what are you gonna? Oh, and they also have +1 to charge innately, which means that if you teleport them before you have any bonuses to charge, they have an 8-inch charge. And if you teleport them before any or after you get that +1 to charge, they're on a 7-inch charge, which is cool because they don't have access to Mighty Destroyers, right? So I don't know. I'm kind of stuck. Again, I have 150 points. So how would you spend 150 points to round out this list, keeping in mind that the role that I'm kind of missing is some kind of like flanker, some kind of like off to the side screen, something like that. So I don't know, I'm kind of leaning towards the Savage Boarboy Maniacs, also just in part because I know that they're, you know, poor Bone Splitters have not been getting a lot of love, and I kind of just want to run a unit. I don't think I have very many. Do I even have, like, I have a couple of big Stabbas, and I got obviously a Wargog Prophet, and I think that's about it. That's all I got for Bone Splitters. So getting a little, you know, five-man squad would be pretty good, I think. The last option that I am considering is, of course, the Cruel Boy Monster-Killers. At 120 points, before my list, I couldn't fit it, but now for 130 points, I can. And the Cruel Boy Monster-Killers actually are a pretty decent final addition into a big wild list, I feel. But only if your opponent's gonna run monsters. Only if you're expecting monsters to be run. Then they can fill in it to a couple of roles. One, if your opponent doesn't have any monsters, they can just be a throwaway screen on the side. They have 16 wounds between them. So, like, that's pretty good. Maybe it's more than that. Yep. And then they also shut off monstrous rampages within 6 inches, which is strong, right? Like, being like, well, you can't roar me. That's strong. That's a good ability. And the other ability, Bait and Trap, where they, on a 3-up, they give Strike Last to a monster until the end of the phase. It's like you don't get to roar and you have to strike last. And then I have my Gouger on the right flank running off and giving another strike last. It's like we're starting to, you know, get some pretty good, some trades here. So I've also considered running the Cruel Boys Monster Killers as well. But again, just as a, only really if I'm expecting my opponent to be running some pretty good monsters. So, I mean, I don't know. Do you guys see monsters in pretty much every list, or in every list that you run up against? do think that the Cruel Boys Monster Kill is a auto include for me here in this list. So it's kind of like a bunch of pros and cons, right? Snarlfangs are out because I think that the Savage Boarboy Maniacs fill the same role, but I think they just do it a little bit better. They're 15 wounds. They have a 6-up ward. They do have a 5-up save, or a 6-up save instead of a 5-up save. So the save is one worse, but they do have a 6-up ward, so that helps them with mortal wounds a little bit. And they are more wounds, right? So it's 15 wounds instead of 10 wounds. And then one worse save, but a ward. So it's like they're going to be tankier. They're going to hit a little bit harder, and they buff a little bit better. And they're also orcs. So if they, and they can just be a cheap screen on the side. I know 150 is not really cheap anymore, but if nothing else, if they just sit on one of the flanks and they just take an objective and die, it's like, okay, because that's kind of what the Snarlfang riders have been doing. So, I mean, I think that the Snarlfangs are out and Maniacs are in, at least that. And then Monster Killers, if I'm expecting a lot of monsters in the meta, and that I don't know in what situation I would take Hobgrot, Slittas, and Dagox over anything else. Notice how Gut Rippers aren't part of this conversation. Notice how I'd rather take Slittas and Stab Lads over Gut Rippers. Although Gut Rippers maybe actually Gut Rippers do have a spot here. Let's actually consider that. Because I just don't like Gut Rippers. So I never really consider them. Okay, so Gut Rippers are 20 wounds. So that's a pretty good amount of wounds. They can give -1 to hit, right? So they can sort of be a little bit of an annoying screen. Again, they would probably sit off on the flank. I do have a Swamp Color Shaman, so there is some play here to throw some poison on them and to pump out some more mortal wounds. But they are slow. Slow as molasses. They are orcs. So, I mean, like, if we can get those Wicked Stickers on 3s and 3s, 21 attacks, 3s and 3s, throw a Hoarfrost on it, throw poison on it, like, I feel like we could, suddenly they could maybe do some decent damage. So what is it, 21 3s and 3s, 2 rend? Let's just throw this in the damage calculator really quickly. So, 10 models, 2 attacks, 3s and 3s, 2 rend, 1 damage, and leader bonus attacks, cool. And then we need one more thing as well. We need the mortal wounds to hit, 6 unmodified, 1 mortal wound, 3s and 3s, 2 rend. Yeah, like, this is of course with Hoarfrost and everything, so they're dealing about as much damage as the pigs, because they're not throwing as many dice, but they are dealing these. But they do deal some mortal wounds. But they're quite slow. They're quite slow. So yeah, I don't think the Gut Rippers do it. The thing with the Hobgrots and so this is Gut Rippers are 20 wounds, and Dagox and Hobgrots are actually more wounds than that, and they are 14 feet instead of 10 feet. And Dagox Stab Lads has a little bit of very similar kind of like -1 attacks. Oh, it's -1 attack characteristic. It's -1 attacks, not -1 to hit. That's actually better. And I feel like the Monster Killers are probably better than Gut Rippers here too. The Cruel Boy Monster Killers actually, so they throw how many dice? They throw 22 dice. And they also have venom encrusted weapons. So then they're like 3s and 2s, 1 rend, with all the big wasp stuff going on, and they're throwing some mortal wounds out there. So they're actually better in every way, I feel. They're just anti-monster. Do we really struggle with anti-monster? Not really. The brutes are there to deal with that. Yeah. Savage Boarboy Maniac, Cruel Boy Monster Killers, or Hobgrot Slittas and Dagox Stab Lads together. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe. Wah.